In this third unit, we are focusing on interactions between students. Of course, teachers are also somewhere present and influence the learning environment, but the focus is on what students perform together and how they cooperate. So we are going to discuss various types of cooperative learning, and then we will zoom into group dynamics, and eventually we will discuss issues related to peer feedback and assessment. First, cooperative learning. Um, there is, again, a sort of fundamental concept here, and also a researcher who has made great influence, has had great influence in the domain of social psychology, also related to education, and that's Kurt Lewin. So we're going to discuss his concept of social interdependence, then focus on Slavin's work on group rewards and individual accountability, then discuss various types of cooperative learning, and in the end we will discuss some work done by Annadine Pullen, PhD student in my group, on students' motives to collaborate. Okay, first, Kurt Lewin. Kurt Lewin emphasizes that groups are characterized or receive their identity, so to speak, from the way people in the group, members of the group, interact and influence each other. And that's his concept of social interdependence. Whenever the effects of individuals' actions are related to the actions of other individuals. So when there is a mutual influence, vice versa, positively or either positively or negatively, there is influence, then we speak about social interdependence. And then there is, for some reason, there is a group. You can think of course, of the classroom as a group, the football team or the hockey team or whatever kind of sports team as a group. You can even think of nations as groups. But the important characteristic of all these groups is the social interdependence, the way in which individuals' actions influence other individuals' actions. Okay. Such group has, to a certain extent, common goals and is a dynamic whole. So that's what I said. There is something which makes the group stand out as an identity, as a dynamic whole. Change in the state of any member or subgroup changes the state of any other member or subgroup. So the importance of this concept of social interdependence is that whenever you do group research, research on groups in an educational setting, then you have to, according to Kurt Lewin, search for the common goals and search for the way in which the members of the group interact with each other and influence each other's behavior and actions. Okay, so that is a sort of focus, a sort of view on group dynamics, and we have learned that from Kurt Lewin. Okay. Now, a few words about Slave and his, again, seminal work, I think, on the influence of rewards for groups or rewards for individuals within the group and the effects on the group performance. When does cooperative learning increase student achievement? That is the major question of his research, which was done back in the 80s of the last century. Well, perhaps I can try to summarize what the major findings of Slavin were. They have been confirmed by other research. And basically, as it's stated here, group rewards based on individual learning lead to better outcomes than control methods. And control methods are, for instance, methods in which groups are rewarded for the product of the group and not for the individual learning, or when only the individual learning counts. You can imagine that there are group products. For instance, a group has to prepare a text, a research report, for instance, in which all members of the group participate, either by doing the research or by analyzing the outcomes, or by writing and documenting, and all kinds of tasks. You know, probably you have had in your own program when you were a student such a group assignments, practicals in which you had to collaborate with other students in order to arrive at a joint product, a research report. Okay, now the question is, what makes the group work, basically? Is it the group product to which all group members contribute? The group, the goal, the common goal, which defines the group as a whole, as Kurt Lewin was saying? Or do you have to focus on the individual learning? So perhaps you have all members of the group take a test, and you measure their individual performance on this test on the subject matter related to the group assignment. Well, as you can see here, the blue columns are the positive outcomes. You can see that the best outcome arrives when you have a group product, but when the individual learning is accounted for in rating or assessing the group as a whole. So you can imagine that you ask all members of the group to work on a group product, and then you take a test. You let all members of the group complete a test about their knowledge of the group product, for instance, for the research project which has been completed. And you give all individual members of the group a rating, and then, for instance, attributes the lowest rating within the group to the group as a whole. So the group as a whole receives the rating of the worst performing member of the group. If you arrange such a assessment procedure, then that has as effect, as Slavin studied, that members of the group are really working to get all members of the group at an appropriate level of mastery of the subject, which has to be accounted for in the group product. So all members of the group have to arrive at a certain level, and that is the interest of all members of the group, because all members of the group receive the lowest assessment of the individual members of the group. So you can imagine that is a situation which is very favorable for a high group outcome. But it is also at the same time perhaps not very not considered very wise to do so, because then the groups are more or less tied to each other. Group members are tied to each other. Well, you have to think about that, but it does make sense, as Slavin said, that the individual learning should be accounted for in the group rewards, and that will lead to the best group outcome. Okay, so now we just make a distinction between various types of cooperative learning, 4 types in fact. I will briefly discuss them. Of course you can have some further information when you focus on each of these keywords and you just start to search in Google Scholar or another database. This is an interesting approach. Let's imagine that you have 16 students in your group, and that you arrange them originally in 4 teams of 4. The A team, the B team, the C team, and the D team. And that you ask the group to study, let's say, 4 each group study a question which is related to the other questions. For instance, you have to study an animal, 4 different animals, which are all, for instance, apes or mammals or whatever kind of category you make you distinguish. So you give each group an individual animal to study, And the group has to answer, let's say, 4 questions on that particular animal. So perhaps something about the habitat, something about, you know, the dangers the group encounters, whether it is preyed by other animals or is preying other animals, where the animal lives, what kind of food the animal has, etc., etc. So let's say that you have 4 questions. I just mentioned 2, so the food situation and the habitat where the animal lives. And let's imagine that you ask each of the 4 teams to study a different animal with the same 4 questions. Yeah, so then you have a person number 1 in the groups studies, for instance, the habitat of the animal, and person number 2 studies, let's say, the food situation of the animal. Yeah, I hope you can follow me. So team A does that for, let's say, a leopard, and team B for a tiger, and team C for a lion, and team D for another, you know, dangerous animal. Okay, so then you have 4 questions answered about the 4 animals. In each team, 1 animal. 4 questions, 1 animal. That's the first one. And then the second round, question number 2, the right side of the panel, you rearrange the teams. So you bring together all number 1s and all number 2s and all number 3s and all number 4s. Now, each of these number 1s has studied a different animal, but with the same question, the habitat question. Now, and you can ask now these number 1s to bring together, you know, what has been found about the habitats of the 4 animals which have been studied, to arrive at some conclusions about these dangerous animals and where they live and how they live, etc., what their environment is. And then you can arrive at a sort of, you know, group product, an essay about dangerous animals and where they live. And in the second group, the 2s, you can answer the question what kind of food dangerous animals have. In the third question, you can discuss how they bring childs, how they raise offspring. And the fourth question might be something like whether they are threatened or whether they may die, etc. The animal as a species may vanish because of all kinds of environmental influences, etc. So then you have a story about dangerous animals, focusing on their habitat, on their food situation, on their offspring, and on the dangers which threaten the species. So then you have a more, let's say, a group product, which is more than just a summary of the description of 4 animals. You see, the jigsaw method is a method to arrive at such higher level reports at a higher level of abstraction, because you rearrange the teams like it is shown here in this figure. Okay, so that's a very nice, I think, approach of cooperative learning, the jigsaw method. Well, in group problem solving, you can imagine that you have teams which work on a problem. The team as a whole has to solve. So all members of the team work on the problem, distribute the work, various subtasks, etc. But you can also imagine that in such a group problem solving situation, each individual is given some information, and that the collective information is needed to solve the problem as a whole, or the challenge which has been prepared for the group. So in the latter situation, there is the need to cooperate, because the solution is in the hands of individual members of the group who have to pool their knowledge in order to arrive at a solution for the group as a whole. Whereas in the first situation, the group may decide to divide the labor and to distribute tasks among the members of the group, but then it is the group which makes such a decision to arrive at a proper and an efficient arrangement of subtasks, so to speak, to solve the problem. Whereas in the second situation, this is done by the teacher or the organizer of the group problem-solving session. Okay? Now, we have already been discussing the communities of learners, but it is, of course, an example of collaborative learning. Cooperative learning, I just briefly mentioned the characteristics of a community of learners. The students participate in the process of knowledge development, so the participation means that all members of the group value the other members of the group because of their expertise, be it at a high level or a low level, but all members need each other in order to arrive at the solution or at the completion of the task. And they are aware of the fact that each member is a necessary part of the whole endeavor which the group is working on. Inquiry-based education is usually the pedagogical model adopted in a community of learners. There is a focus on big ideas, a relationship with the curriculum, and there is, of course, the culture of research and collaboration and communication with which the students become acquainted. There is this reflection part, critical judgment by reflection. That's, again, a group activity where students exchange experiences and arrive at conclusion based on the individual experiences. And there is, of course, the availability of resources and equipment. Now, that's the basic these are the basic characteristics of a community of learners. And you can imagine that this is a nice example of a cooperative learning. This learning by teaching is a very specific example. I did like to include it because, basically because of the statement by Vygotsky, the one who does the talking does the learning. So a good way to learn about a particular subject is to teach it. That's how I myself became, let's say, acquainted with the domain of psychology, basically. And of course, I graduated as a psychologist, but then after a few years, I started to teach the introductory psychology course, and I've learned a lot from teaching that course. So that were the books like, Hilgert and Atkinson, or in other books which are popular and very well written and very useful. But by really studying and teaching the subject matter, I learned a lot about many domains of psychology. As a matter of fact, I often encountered a situation in which a student in the classroom asked a particular question about a concept or a theme or a theory we were elaborating on. And then I realized, trying to answer the question, that I didn't understand the particular concept or theory not well myself. So I sometimes said something like, well, this is a very interesting question you're posing, and unfortunately, I don't have the time to dig into it deeply enough at the moment. But next week, I will return to your interesting question and try to answer it as best as I can. So then I discovered some gap in my own knowledge, and often that happened, as a matter of fact. So therefore, it's indeed a very good way to master a particular domain, namely teaching. Talking, and that's what you do as a teacher. Now, the German psychologist Jean-Paul Martin, he in fact developed this concept in his learning through teaching, or Lernen durch Lehren approach, in which he asked groups of students to study a subject matter area. The material was divided in small units. Small groups of students studied these units, and within the group, and also between groups, the members taught the group, the subgroup, and the whole group, in order to arrive at some mastery of the subject matter. So that was an interesting approach, and in fact, Martin was able to show that that he was quite successful in this particular learning by teaching approach. Okay. So now I would like to say a few words on the project by Annadine Pullen, one of my PhD students, who together with Didi Griffioen and Judith Schoneboom and Björn de Koning works on the issue of student motivation to collaborate. In fact, she is focusing on what is called the potential for excellence. And so she's actually interested in questions like, do excellent students really want to collaborate, or do they feel collaboration as something which, let's say, threatens their own performance because of the need to collaborate with other people. In fact, if we return to the slaving issue, you may realize that bright students, may indeed be performing worse because of the fact that they have to collaborate. Okay, so that idea that bright students do not want to collaborate was tested in this study together with a lot of other questions. So Annadine actually distinguished various indicators of excellency, potential for excellence, like intelligence, creativity, and first year grade point average. We are talking about students of what we call hogescholen or universities of applied sciences. And so they were in their second year or even third year, I think. And so their first year grade point average was seen as an indicator of their excellency. And the personality characteristics which are combined in the Big Five. So that's one. We'll return to that in a minute. So potential for excellence was one cluster of variables, and the other cluster was the motivation to collaborate on a task. So the extent to which individual students valued a particular collaborative task, thought positively about their self-efficacy in relation to this collaborative task. Whether students values the collaboration part of the task, and again, whether they were positive about their chances to perform well in such a collaborative setting. So it was the task and the collaboration part of the task which were measured separately, both the intrinsic part and the self-efficacy part of a student's motivation. So we have quite a complex model. The task was, I think I have written that down, yes, here. The task was completed by students in their third year, as I said, in a University of Applied Sciences, in a sports management and business program, and also in a marketing and commerce program, first and second year. So quite a large sample of students. The students had in a sort of, they were in a sort of introductory camp at the beginning of the year, and they worked on programs throughout the days of the camp. So they had to invent a marketable program-related product or service in a small team, either 2 or 3 members in the team or 4 or 5 members in the team. That was the task the students had to complete, and we were interested in the extent to which they were motivated to do that particular task. Okay, now as I said, we measured various variables. So the cognitive variables, the motivation variables, and we studied the influence of these variables on, let's immediately show the model, on the collaborative and the task-related values. So we have the task-related values intrinsically, the task-related values extrinsically, the task-related self-efficacy, and the collaborative values and the collaborative self-efficacy. That were the sort of, in this model, the dependent variables. So the outcome variables, which we studied, or actually we studied the influence on various student characteristics on these outcome variables, on these motivation variables. Now, as you can see, gender did not make any difference as far as the scores on these motivation variables are concerned. Age did not influence the scores. Prior education had some negative influence, so the higher the prior education, the lower the task-related self-efficacy and also the collaborative self-efficacy. So on the self-efficacy measures, there was a slight negative influence. The arrows are when the correlation coefficients are higher, the arrows become fatter. So that's how I try to make it visible to a certain extent. Okay, then we have the cognitive variables. So grade point average and intelligence exerted some negative influence on task-related values, extrinsic values, and collaborative values. So the higher the grade point average and the higher the intelligence, the lower the extrinsic value of the task was rated, and also the lower collaboration was rated. So that is a bit in agreement with our hypotheses that indeed better performing students do have a slightly negative motivation to collaborate. But as far as creativity is concerned, there is a positive influence. So the higher creativity score, the higher the extrinsic value of the task was evaluated. And there are strong positive effects from the extraversion parameter in the Big Five, the extraversion characteristic, and also the conscientiousness characteristic, and also the openness to new experiences characteristic. So let's say that conscientiousness positively influenced at least, I think, four of the four of the five variables. So a very strong influence on a positive influence on self-efficacy. The higher the conscientious score was, the higher people considered themselves as able to complete the task and the collaboration part of the task. And extraversion also influenced positively the values, intrinsic and extrinsic of the task, and also the perceived value of collaboration. So you see there is some, indeed some, I think that I'm not sure whether I return to, well, here are the major conclusions. So indeed students with a higher grade point averages are less motivated to collaborate. And extraversion and conscientiousness are favorable characteristics in a collaborative setting. So students with high scores on extraversion and conscientiousness will probably flourish in a group problem solving or group assignment as part of their program. And these students also feel more confident about their own capabilities as far as collaboration in an educational setting is concerned. Okay, so yeah, that's the model that we have discussed that, and now we can say a few words about group dynamics. First of all, a few words on social loafing, and then a few words on mixed ability grouping, and then a few words on classroom management. First, social loafing. Well, people who, let's say, perform worse or show less effort to achieve a goal when working in a group than when working alone, these people show symptoms of social loafing. And this is the famous, experiment in which social loafing was shown by Ringelmann. You can see here the pooling efforts of participants in a group of 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, 6, 7 or 8, and you can see there's a nice declining amount of effort related to the size of the group. So the bigger the group, the less individual members of the group are going to pool or to put effort in pooling because of the group size. Interesting phenomenon, I think. Okay, so social loafing Yeah, what's the reason? Perhaps there is less individual responsibility when the project is large and students do not feel personally responsible for the outcomes of the group project, let's say a research project or whatever it is, because their influence is restricted and they are dependent on others and cannot do it on their own, etc., etc. So, and this effect is larger to the extent that the size of the group is bigger. So that is a problem in of course in group assignments in a program. What helps is peer evaluation, and there again Slaven can be reminded of, because whenever you have to consider the products of the individual members of the group as being part of the group evaluation, the group assessment, then you have to make sure that individual members of the group do their work and invest their effort, because that is necessary to arrive at a good group product. As when you are, let's say, teaching and when you are facilitating a group and trying to bring the group to a good product, you have to actively address the issue of social loafing, because you may encounter a situation where one of the members of the group is actually pulling out, and the other members of the group feel frustrated because of the fact that this individual member does not do his or her work. And as a let's say facilitator of the group, as a trainer or teacher, you have to openly address that issue, discuss it, and you should not hesitate to indeed address the individual group member who does pull out and does not do his or her work. So it's a phenomenon which is there, and it's necessary to address it actively and openly. Okay. Well, mixed ability grouping is an issue which has been studied in various educational contexts, from primary education to university education. And the major outcomes, I've just summarized them here, are that if you have high and low ability students, then heterogeneous groups are the best learning environment for these students, whereas homogeneous groups are better for mid-ability students. So in low ability students may, in a heterogeneous group, benefit from the high ability students, and these high ability students may, in fact, benefit, as we saw, from the fact that they train or teach the low ability students. So that might be the mechanism behind the better outcomes of these high ability groups. Whereas when the group has a very average level of performance, then homogeneity is better than heterogeneity. There is also a gender effect here. When we have gender balanced groups, so groups with an equal number of boys and girls, then girls are more cooperative than when the balance is less. In fact, when there are more girls than boys, or more boys than girls. Both situations are detrimental for girls' cooperation. In fact, you should have this gender balance in order to arrive at these positive results for female students. Okay, then a few words about classroom management. This is basically a subject, I think, which is part of a teacher education program. But as it is such a widespread phenomenon that you may encounter in various situations, even when you start to become a university teacher or a teacher in any other area, therefore it might be as useful to have a few words spent on classroom management. So there is a lot of research done what works and what does not work. It's not very theory underpinned, I must say, but it may help to summarize a few results of this area, classroom management. First of all, create a classroom environment that facilitates student engagement. Engagement is let's say, the trick here. We have discussed engagement in the motivation and education module, so you may return to that in order to find out what the term actually means. But engagement is the solution, is the key to the solution of the classroom management issue. So you should arrange a situation in which all students are really engaged. That's one thing, and you may even use the physical arrangement of the classroom, you know, where you put the tables and the chairs in order to arrive at such an engagement situation. So the rows, the usual rows, which are used in ordinary primary school classrooms, may not be the best arrangement to create such an engagement situation for all students. Then it might be helpful to have some rules and procedures, not too much, let's say 5 to 8, and it might be very wise to define these rules and procedures collaboratively at the beginning of a term, so that all students really feel connected and feel engaged as far as obeying and maintaining these rules and procedures is concerned. And you should put them on a bulletin board or whatever, somewhere where everybody can see these rules and procedures day to day. Further, the last, let's say, major outcome of this research is that effective communication is very important. And there, the teacher, of course, comes into play again. So constructive assertiveness, emphatic responding, and clarity is, as a start, already very important. When you enter the class and you simply put on the blackboard or on your PowerPoint presentation a list of subjects you're going to discuss, or a list of tasks or a list of points you're going to discuss, that already helps a lot. That makes all students engaged, all students know what the program is for this particular class, and when the class is ready to leave and has completed its performance, and that is already something which helps to make all students feel engaged. When you have such a list and it's very long, then students become perhaps a bit noisy because they don't feel engaged to such a long program. Or when you are not able to complete all the bullets on your list, the tasks on your list, then again you have a problem with the engagement of the students, because they feel these lists are not important anymore, because they simply do not influence the behavior of the teacher or the students. So the list should be realistic, and it should be clear and should be visible on the blackboard or on your PowerPoint presentation, so everybody feels engaged to work towards completion of these tasks. Okay, engagement, that's the proper word here. Now, the last issue is peer feedback and assessment. I would like to discuss the issue of feedback, types of feedback, and then see what's in it when you create a situation in which students provide feedback to other students and even perhaps assess each other's performance. As I said, that is a measure to reduce the negative effects of social loafing, because then students are, let's say, engaged also on each other's performance and outcomes. Okay. Well, the major work on feedback, the recent work, has been done by John Hattie in his review studies. You probably have encountered them. The Power of Feedback is a paper in the Review of Educational Research of 2007, in which all major findings are brought together. I just show them here briefly. Whenever there is a situation in which you have to arrive at a particular goal, for instance, you have to reduce the discrepancy between current understanding and the purpose or the goals of the class, then you should try to reduce this discrepancy. It's a very logical, diagram, and you see. Students can do that by increased efforts and employment of more effective strategies, or they can also try to abandon the goals or lower the goals or whatever. Teachers can provide appropriate and challenging and specific goals, and can assist students, scaffold students to reach them through effective learning strategies and feedback. So feedback is also a very important part of scaffolding, of course, as we already saw. Well, effective feedback in such a situation answers 3 questions. First, where am I going? The goals. What are the goals? So the relationship with current performance and the goals, the feed up, as John Hattie calls it. How am I going? What's my progress towards the goals, the feedback, and what's my next step, feed forward. I may remind you of the 3 questions which Alan Schoenfeld asks. What are you doing, and why are you doing this, and are you making progress? So these are related to these questions in his sort of scaffolding, arrangement for group problem solving. Okay, it's interesting and important to see what the outcomes, what the effects of feedback are at various levels. Of course, first at the task level. So feedback may help to understand how well the tasks are understood or performed. So the quality of the performance is, of course, included in the feedback. But the feedback may also address the process level. So what are you doing, and how am I going? That's also an important part. So the process part is also important. These are the more, let's say, content-oriented parts of feedback, the task level and process level. And you have also more the motivational characteristics of feedback. So you may address the self-regulation level. What's your next step, and where are you going? So the self-monitoring, the directing and the regulating of actions. And you may also influence, of course, with feedback, the self-efficacy of the student, the personal evaluations and affect, usually positive about the learner. So does the learner feel well about performing this particular task, or does the learner actually is more or less desolate about not achieving what is meant to be. So I'm a member of a choir, and the conductor of the choir sometimes provides feedback which helps us to improve our performance. Also at the motivational part, so you're making progress, or you can do this, you have proven to do this, etc. You've shown that you can do this, you have proven that you can do this. But sometimes he's less pedagogically versed and just simply says, well, this is a flat note, or this is awkward, or whatever. And you can imagine that these 2 types of feedback have different effects on, let's say, the personal evaluations of self-efficacy, etc., and the feeling that you are working towards a good performance. Okay, so this is what Hattie all said about feedback, and you may discover more in his paper, in the 2007 paper on feedback. Now, there are various types of feedback, of course. You can imagine that you focus on, as I already indicated in the diagram of Hattie, you can provide feedback for various reasons. Peer assessment, in this case, you can do that in different curriculum areas. You can do this because you want to save staff assessment time, or you want to add value in terms of cognitive, metacognitive, and other gains for participants. Feedback can be summative or formative. So summative, that's the end, result, which is evaluated and assessed in a conclusive way. Or you can provide feedback during the process of learning or group problem solving or whatever, which helps to further develop, the group's performance and work towards the goal of the group. You can base feedback on test performance, on writings, presentations, group work projects, etc., etc. You can peer feedback use as a replacement for official staff assessment, or you can use it as adding to staff assessment. It can be unidirectional or reciprocal, so you can ask student A to to provide feedback to the performance of B and then ask B to provide feedback to the performance of A. It can be oral or written, and it can be in the same group, or you can use mixed groups, more advanced students to provide feedback to less advanced students, for instance, in heterogeneously composed groups, as I discussed before. So these are various types of feedback which you can choose from. What is the advantage of providing feedback for the assessor and for the assessee? Let's focus first on the assessor. As I already said, you can learn by teaching, by training, by talking, and you can of course also learn by assessing. It's in itself, you know, a skill, asking intelligent and adaptive questions, and you can develop that skill by providing feedback. You spend time on the task as an assessor, so you learn also not only through assessing, but simply by spending your time on the task. And of course, you develop skills in reviewing, summarizing, clarifying, giving feedback, diagnosing misconceived knowledge. So it's not only the questions which have been developed, the ability to ask questions, but also the skills in reviewing and summarizing, etc. These are all major benefits for the assessor, but also the assessee is given is benefiting from receiving feedback. The assessee may arrive at greater clarity about the learning goals, may better understand the learning goals through feedback, may develop a better view on poor and good performance, so may develop his or her own standards, which may be used in the progress of the work, may develop a language to discuss quality, and that's also an important characteristic. So these are more or less metacognitive effects. This language is useful. You can discuss, you know, what is good performance and what is poor performance. You may, by developing these skills, arrive at a better, more accurate self-assessment and norm referencing. What is my position? You are better able to assess that yourself. Of course, you learn better by receiving swift feedback. So it improves your learning curve, and it also improves your higher order and better quality thinking, which may help you again to arrive at a better metacognitive view on the task. So these are important benefits for the assessee. Okay, this ends our discussion of interaction between students. We have discussed various types of cooperative learning. We have seen various characteristics of group dynamics and various forces being active in groups. And we have discussed forms and qualities and effects of peer feedback and assessment.